Today's story begins at 200 miles per hour, where a single blinking warning light changed everything, and the impossible decision that followed ended up saving 314 lives. The morning sky looked calm from the outside, but inside Flight 709, tension had been quietly building long before anyone realized something was wrong. The aircraft, a wide-body twin-engine jet carrying 314 souls, had just crossed into its descent corridor. The sun reflected off the ocean below, painting the clouds in gold, hinting at a peaceful landing ahead. But peace was never guaranteed at 30,000 feet. Especially not today. Captain Adrian Wolf had flown for 27 years without a single serious incident. His crew trusted him, his passengers saw him as a symbol of safety, and even the airline used his image in training modules. He carried a reputation built on calm precision. But as the aircraft began descending toward the major international airport below, an unexpected vibration trembled through the fuselage. It was small, barely noticeable, yet to a trained pilot, even the smallest shake could reveal a hidden danger. Inside the cockpit, the first officer scanned the instrument panel with a growing unease. On the surface, everything looked normal. Engine parameters stable, fuel balanced, hydraulics functioning within limits. But an amber indicator blinked faintly near the landing gear panel. Once, then again, then stopped. As if undecided whether it should warn or not, a faint mechanical, grinding sound briefly echoed. Through the cabin floor before, silence took over again. Passengers, unaware of the subtle signs of trouble, were preparing for landing. Seatbelts clicked, windows opened, phones switched to airplane mode. Children pointed excitedly at the coastline emerging below. The cabin crew moved with their trained grace, checking overhead bins, adjusting seatbacks, and preparing for the final approach briefing. Everything seemed ordinary, routine, predictable. But deep within the aircraft's belly, where hydraulic lines snaked around metal frameworks and mechanical actuators waited for their commands, something critical was failing. The right main landing gear, one of the three essential legs that would support the entire aircraft during landing, was stuck inside its compartment. A small piece of fractured metal had jammed the retraction linkage, preventing the gear from lowering. At 200 miles per hour, the aircraft would need all landing gear deployed, locked, and ready. But this one wasn't moving. As the aircraft continued descending, the amber warning finally made up its mind. It lit up steadily, flashing a bright caution on the panel. The pilots exchanged a look. Not fear, not panic, but intense focus. A warning like this could mean anything, from a faulty sensor to a catastrophic mechanical failure. But ignoring it was not an option. The captain reached for the landing gear lever and pushed it down. The cockpit filled with the familiar mechanical whir of the gear doors opening. Two green lights appeared almost instantly. Left main gear locked, nose gear locked. But the third light, the right main gear, remained stubbornly dark. The aircraft jolted as if resisting the command. A grinding noise echoed again, and then silence. In the cabin, several passengers felt the shudder. A few raised their heads. Others assumed it was normal turbulence. The cabin crew noticed the shift in atmosphere, the subtle tightening of expressions, the slight decrease in walking speed, the instinctive glances toward the flight deck door. Years of training told them when something wasn't right. The pilots tried again and again. Hydraulic pressure spiked. Metal strained. The gear refused to lower. The aircraft was minutes from landing, yet 1/3 of its support system was missing. Landing without it would mean skidding sideways, sparks erupting, metal shredding against the runway, and the aircraft potentially breaking apart. It was survivable, but highly dangerous. Air traffic control cleared the jet for final approach, unaware of the brewing emergency. The runway stretched ahead like a long invitation for disaster. But Captain Wolf knew he couldn't land. Not like this, not yet. He broke off the approach and pulled the aircraft into a climbing turn, startling some passengers. Drinks shook in cups and overhead compartments rattled softly. The cabin crew braced themselves against the sudden change in motion. More people began sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The captain leveled off at a safe altitude. The aircraft now circled the airport, burning precious fuel while the pilots evaluated their shrinking options. The right gear refused every attempt. The warning light glowed brighter with every passing minute. pulsing in the dim cockpit like a heartbeat counting down to impact. In the cabin, anxiety began spreading silently. An older man clutched his armrests a little tighter. A mother pulled her child closer. The crew tried to maintain calm, but even their controlled movements were edged with tension. Meanwhile, the aircraft systems attempted a final self-correction. A backup hydraulic pump engaged, sending a surge of pressure toward the stuck gear. For a moment, it almost worked. The gear shifted slightly inside the bay, but the fractured linkage resisted violently, trapping the gear halfway, neither fully deployed nor fully retracted. A dangerous position, worse than before. Now the aircraft faced an even more critical threat. At high speed, a partially extended landing gear could rip off entirely during landing, tearing into the fuselage, puncturing fuel tanks, or destabilizing the aircraft enough to cause a deadly roll. Time was running out. Fuel was decreasing. Passenger anxiety was increasing. The airport was on standby. Fire trucks began rolling toward the runway. Emergency crews prepared for the worst-case scenario. And in the cockpit, Captain Adrian Wolfe stared at that single stubborn light, one dark circle standing between 314 lives and catastrophe. He knew the procedure. He knew the risks. And he knew that whatever decision he made next would define everything. The world outside remained calm. Inside the aircraft, survival was becoming a race against physics. The giant jet arced slowly through the clouds, its silver body catching flashes of sunlight as it entered a wide holding pattern. Above the city, down below, fire trucks rolled into position, their red lights flickering against the concrete. Ambulances lined the service roads that bordered the runway. On the airport's operations screens, Flight 709's transponder blinked continuously, a silent reminder that hundreds of lives were still suspended in the air. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was thick with controlled tension. Every few minutes, the aircraft made another circle, tracing invisible loops of anxiety in the sky. The right side gear warning glowed steadily, burning into the captain's eyes like a countdown. Hydraulics were stable but pressured, fuel steadily draining. Every pound lost meant less time to think, less margin for survival. Down in the cabin, the illusion of normalcy was fading. Passengers noticed the prolonged circling. The once casual hum of conversation had dissolved into whispers and uneasy silence. The windows showed the same. Cityscape passing again and again, a pattern that even the youngest travelers could sense was wrong. Flight attendants walked the aisles more slowly now, their reassuring smiles anchored by fear they could not show. Every tremor of the engines, every faint vibration from beneath the floor felt amplified. Captain Wolfe reviewed the emergency checklist once more, his mind processing every variable like pieces on a chessboard. The right gear was jammed halfway. Forcing it could tear the assembly from the wing root. Leaving it retracted meant landing on two legs, risking a violent skid that could ignite fuel tanks. The third option was unthinkable but real. Attempt a manual deployment outside system control, overriding hydraulics completely. It had worked before in training, simulators, but never at 200. MPH with a full load of passengers. On the ground, air traffic controllers relayed updates to emergency coordinators. Foam trucks were prepared to blanket the runway in a thick white layer, reducing friction and sparks. Medics rehearsed triage sequences they prayed they would never need. Even the tower personnel, trained to speak with mechanical calm, found themselves glancing at the digital clock too often. Every rotation of the minute hand brought Flight 709 closer to its fuel-critical threshold. Up in the thin air, clouds rolled across the sun. The light dimmed. Shadows stretched through the cabin like long fingers. Captain Wolfe instructed for a low altitude, pass just close enough for ground. Cameras to capture the underside of the aircraft. As the plane descended, its engines thundered across the terminal buildings. On the monitors below, technicians froze the image and zoomed in. The verdict arrived seconds later. The right gear was visibly jammed, half exposed, twisted at an unnatural angle. If the plane landed like that, the gear would snap the moment rubber touched asphalt. The radio crackled with a calm advisory to climb again. The crew complied. Passengers felt their stomachs lift as the jet banked steeply upward, through thick haze. From the windows, the airport shrank into a patchwork of lights. Somewhere near the rear of the cabin, a small child began to cry softly. the sound quickly absorbed by the muted thrum of the engines. In the cabin galley, the senior flight attendant steadied herself against a counter, silently counting heartbeats. Her colleagues exchanged glances of grim understanding. They knew what an emergency landing felt like. They had never faced one without all wheels beneath them. Fuel gauges dropped lower. Captain Wolf calculated his timeline. At the current burn rate, they had roughly 25 minutes before the reserve threshold, after which the engines themselves would become the next threat. Every decision now had to be made with precision bordering on instinct. He initiated a new sequence, depressurize the gear bay, then attempt gravity drop. If the jammed linkage loosened under reduced pressure, the gear might free itself. For a brief moment, hope returned. A faint vibration rippled through the fuselage. Then, silence again. The warning light refused to turn green. The minutes bled away. The sun dipped lower, turning the horizon orange and red. Inside the cockpit, temperature indicators climbed slightly as the engines strained to maintain altitude. With less fuel weight, sweat gathered along the captain's temple, but his expression stayed carved in stone. Behind him, the co-pilot methodically noted every step, his handwriting a steady anchor against chaos. Outside, dusk deepened. Lights along the city blinked alive. From up here, it looked peaceful. Tiny cars, steady movement, ordinary life continuing. Yet high above, 314 people waited for one man's decision. A decision that would either bring them safely home or end in catastrophe. Finally, the captain reached for a lever marked alternate release. It was the last manual system, the one never touched unless all else failed. To activate it meant surrendering control to physics, allowing gravity to wrench the gear into position without hydraulic regulation. If it worked, the gear would lock. If it failed, it could collapse entirely. He pulled. The aircraft shuddered violently. Metal groaned under stress. Passengers gasped as the jet dipped suddenly, then leveled. A deep, dragging noise echoed through the floor, like steel grinding against rock. In the cockpit, the vibration lasted 5 seconds, then stopped. 2 lights glowed green. The third blinked, once, then went dark again. Half success, half disaster. The gear had moved further, but still not locked. Worse, internal sensors now detected partial structural damage. Landing in this state could cause the gear to buckle instantly. Yet there was no time left to try again. Fuel indicators now flashed amber. On the ground, emergency units were ordered to final positions. Foam dispersal lines were activated, forming a long white stripe across the runway. The tower cleared all other traffic. Every eye below turned upward. Captain Wolf steadied the control column. His mind ran through the landing configuration one last time. Flaps, speed, trim, emergency slides, crew signal. Every motion felt slower, heavier, like time itself was thickening around him. He knew he had to commit. As the aircraft began its descent, city lights reflected against its belly, illuminating the half-exposed landing gear. Passengers gripped armrests. The engines roared louder, echoing through the cabin like a heartbeat. 2,000 feet, 1,000. The runway grew larger, its foam-covered surface gleaming under floodlights. The jet lined up perfectly. 500 feet. 300. The left and nose gear would touch first. The right, mangled and uncertain, hung in limbo. The slightest imbalance could send the aircraft rolling uncontrollably across the tarmac. Inside, breath stopped. Outside, the world held still. And then, the first sparks touched the night. The first sparks came like tiny stars exploding. Beneath the aircraft, barely, visible at first, then multiplying in violent streaks as metal kissed asphalt. The nose gear touched smoothly. The left main gear followed with a heavy thud. And for a fraction of a second, it looked as if the aircraft might settle into a controlled landing. But it was only an illusion. The moment the damaged right landing gear brushed the runway, the entire aircraft jolted sideways. A brutal metallic screech tore across the night air as the twisted assembly dragged against the ground. Sparks burst in a shower of white and orange beneath the wing, scattering like fireworks across the foamed surface. From the cabin, passengers saw flashes of light rippling through the windows, a bore reminder that the ground was no longer a distant concept, but a force they were now battling. Inside the cockpit, vibrations rattled every instrument panel. Warning lights erupted in a storm of red. The aircraft leaned dangerously to the right, the wing lowering far closer to the runway than it should. The engines howled as they tried to offset the imbalance, but gravity and momentum were now in charge. The captain gripped the controls with calculated force, his eyes locked on the shrinking distance ahead. Every decision came down to inches. The right gear groaned under pressure, bending further with every passing second. The emergency foam softened. The sparks, but could not silence the grinding, fury of metal collapsing under weight. The aircraft began tugging sideways, drifting off the center line, leaving deep glowing scars across the runway surface. In the cabin, passengers felt the tilt. Bodies pressed against armrests. Bags shifted overhead. A flight attendant fell to her knees but grabbed a seat frame before slipping. The entire cabin trembled like a living heartbeat, pulsing with fear. Some passengers shut their eyes. Others stared wide, frozen in disbelief. Every vibration felt like a warning that the next might be the last. The jet continued hurtling forward at high speed. The left gear remained steady but could not carry the full weight. The right gear threatened to fold at any moment. If it collapsed completely, the wing would strike the ground, tearing open the fuel tank, a disaster no one wanted to imagine. The runway lights blurred past in long neon streaks. The airport emergency crews watched in stunned silence. Firefighters clutched hoses ready to release chemical suppressant foam. Medics waited behind barricades, hearts pounding, unable to do anything but hope the plane stayed upright long enough to stop. The aircraft veered 1 meter left, then back right. The captain corrected it with small, precise inputs. But physics was gaining control. The broken gear jammed further into the fuselage, sending a jolt through the wing. More sparks. More metal grinding. The jet's right side dipped slightly, the wingtip now dangerously close to scraping the runway. At this angle, even an inch of misjudgment could flip the aircraft onto its side. Sensors screamed warnings. Heat levels rose in the braking systems. Tires hissed against foam, struggling to maintain traction. In the cockpit, the captain scanned distance remaining, half the runway left. The aircraft was slowing, but not fast enough. The right gear juddered again, a violent shake that echoed through the fuselage. The cabin felt the tremor. A heavy overhead bin popped open, sending a bag tumbling down. A child clutched their parent's arm as the plane lurched sharply right. For a terrifying moment, it tilted more than it should, so much that passengers on the right side saw the runway rushing by just feet from their windows. A single spark struck the wing edge, leaving a thin burning trail before extinguishing. Still, the aircraft pushed forward. Still, the captain held it steady. The runway markers counted down like the ticking of a clock. The plane passed the 2,000-foot sign. Then 1,500. The brakes glowed hot. Heat shimmered beneath the wings. Smoke hissed from the crushed metal of the right landing gear. Then came the worst moment yet. The damaged gear snapped. The sound was not loud, it was deep. A heavy metallic pop that resonated through the entire fuselage. The gear folded completely under the wing, and the jet dropped abruptly on its right side. A massive explosion of sparks shot out as the wing brushed the runway. The aircraft jolted so hard that dozens of passengers were thrown forward. Flight attendants braced against seats, holding on with shaking hands. Outside, the firefighters reacted instantly, releasing a thick blanket of foam across the runway. The aircraft now skidded at a dangerous angle, showering sparks like a comet tearing across the earth. The wing dug slightly into the foam-covered asphalt, slowing it just enough to prevent collapse, but not enough to stop the violent slide. The captain tilted the controls, fighting to keep the left gear bearing the majority of the weight. If the wing dipped even a few degrees more, the fuel lines beneath it could rupture. Alarms blared. Flames briefly flickered along the underside before the foam choked them out. The runway end approached fast. The captain pulled the nose slightly up, easing pressure on the collapsing side. The aircraft shuddered but obeyed. The grinding softened into a dragging rumble. Speed dropped, but the slide continued. Inside the cabin, silence no longer existed. Every second was filled with the roar of friction, the thumping of heavy vibrations, the faint whistling of air forced between metal and ground. Passengers held their breath, waiting for either impact or survival. Finally, the jet slowed further. The runway lights no longer streaked by. They drifted past slowly, almost peacefully. The shower of sparks faded into scattered flickers. The cabin tremors weakened. The right wing rose slightly, no longer scraping. The sliding continued, but at a manageable drift. The aircraft rolled to a near stop. until one final jolt shook the cabin as the right wing settled into the foam. The engines shut down in a descending whine. Everything went still. No one moved. No one breathed. The night air outside was quiet. But inside, every passenger could feel it in their chest. They were still alive. The aircraft had stopped, but the danger wasn't over. The twisted landing gear had crushed a portion of the wing's understructure, and fuel sensors flickered inconsistently. A small wisp of smoke rose from beneath the fuselage. In the cockpit, the captain eyed the temperature readings, all dangerously high. The emergency slides would have to be deployed and fast. The crew prepared for evacuation, and the pilot braced for the final challenge, getting 314 people out before the damaged wing turned smoke into flame. For a long moment, the aircraft sat motionless at the far end of the runway, its body steaming lightly under the floodlights. The night felt unnaturally quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. Inside the cockpit, the captain studied the flickering fuel indicators, numbers jittering, pressure unstable. The right wing had taken the brunt of the slide, and beneath it, fuel dripped slowly into the thick layer of emergency foam. The danger was no longer the landing. It was the minutes after. The cabin lights glowed dimly. Passengers remained frozen in their seats, processing the impossibility that they were alive. Every breath felt borrowed. Every heartbeat echoed too loudly. The smell of burned metal mixed with the faint bite of chemical foam seeping through the vents. Somewhere toward the back, thin lines of smoke drifted upward through the floor seams. The captain unlatched his harness and stood. His legs trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of everything he had just forced the aircraft to survive. He signaled the flight attendants, initiating the sequence they trained for but never wished to face. Each crew member sprang into action, unlocking emergency exits, preparing slides, assessing which doors were safe to open. Outside, firefighters approached carefully, scanning for fuel leaks or structural shifts. Their radios crackled with updates about the rising temperature beneath the right wing. The foam slowed the heating, but not enough. One spark from the twisted metal could ignite everything. Inside, the flight attendants moved row by row, guiding passengers toward the exits. Despite training, nothing could prepare them for the raw fear on people's faces, the shaking hands clutching armrests, the hesitation before stepping into the unknown outside the aircraft. Children clung to parents. Elderly passengers struggled to stand. The crew supported them, pushing their own fear deep beneath a surge of instinctive responsibility. The first slide deployed with a loud hiss as compressed gas burst into life. It unfurled down the side of the aircraft like a bright lifeline. Passengers stepped onto it, sliding into the arms of emergency responders waiting below. Some slid upright, some toppled, but each one was lifted and moved away with desperate urgency. The heat under the right wing increased steadily. Firefighters sprayed cooling agents, thick white clouds rising around them, but the metal continued to warp. The wing sagged slightly, the internal ribs strained and weakened. If it dipped too far, fuel lines could rupture. The captain saw the danger, felt every second slipping through his fingers. He kept the remaining exits open and pushed evacuation faster. Flight attendants guided passengers with firm motions, never letting panic take root. One crew member supported an elderly man struggling to step into the aisle. Another helped a woman who had sprained her ankle during the landing. Every second mattered. And yet every movement had to be steady. The smoke inside the cabin thickened. It wasn't fire, it was vaporized hydraulic, fluid and heated foam, but its appearance alone created panic. Some passengers began breathing fast, their bodies tense with fear, their hands shaking. The crew urged them toward the exits, steadying them as they climbed out. On the runway, the first firefighters reached the nose of the aircraft. They checked temperature readings, communications relaying the weight load shifting inside the wing. The right side was weakening under strain. The ground beneath the wing absorbed too much heat. A small ripple of flame flickered beneath the crushed landing gear frame, snuffed a second later by sprayed suppressant, but the warning was clear. Time was collapsing. Inside, only a few rows of passengers remained. Children were carried out. Injured passengers were supported by crews on both sides. A flight attendant at the rear scanned the cabin twice to ensure no one was left. The air was now hazy, shimmering with heat. Lights flickered once as electrical systems struggled with internal damage. Outside, medics and firefighters waved frantically for the remaining passengers to move faster. The heat signatures beneath the right wing spiked. A loud metallic groan vibrated through the wing, and the structure sagged further, the fuel tank inside shifting dangerously. The captain helped the last passengers out himself, pushing them toward the nearest slide. Each one stumbled into open air, sliding down to safety. The flight attendants followed, but one stayed at the front, scanning every row of the aircraft with practiced scrutiny. She checked behind seats, beneath fallen bags, under the dim emergency lighting. Only when she was certain that no one remained did she turn toward the exit. The captain watched her climb through the doorway. She slid down the ramp, the emergency lighting reflecting off her reflective vest like a fading star. The captain remained for one last sweep, the rule drilled into them from their earliest days. He checked forward. He checked aft. He checked the galley. He checked the floor. He checked the jump seat. No one left. He stepped toward the open door. Behind him, the right wing groaned so loudly it vibrated through the fuselage. Firefighters shouted. Foam jets arched upward in frantic bursts. The sagging metal deepened. Heat shimmered like a mirage. The captain reached the doorway. Wind rushed in. The night air hit his face. He placed one foot on the slide. A deep boom cracked through the wing. A quick flare of flame erupted underneath, caught by foam within, seconds but leaving a violent reminder of how close disaster was. Firefighters yelled for everyone to move back. Medics rushed survivors farther away. The slide rocked as the captain descended, the world spinning. For a moment under emergency, lights and foam, clouds and shouting responders, he reached the ground. And the moment his feet touched the runway, a wave of relief washed through the crews. Every passenger, every single life had made it out, for souls survived. The firefighters continued cooling the wing, fighting the rising heat long after the last person had been moved to safety. The captain stood among the passengers, his uniform stained with sweat and foam, eyes fixed on the aircraft that had nearly become their tomb. The crew gathered near him, trembling with exhausted adrenaline. Around them, passengers hugged their families, clung to each other in disbelief, and stared up at the plane that had turned a moment of terror into a miracle of survival. Some cried, some sat in shock. Others stared at the night sky, grateful simply to see it again. The captain finally exhaled, a long breath that carried every tension, every fear, every impossible decision he had made in those final moments. He looked at the survivors. He looked at his crew. He looked at the fire crews still battling heat around the crippled wing. And in that moment, one truth settled over everyone. What happened today should have ended in tragedy, but because one pilot refused to give up, every life was saved.